Welcome to the Landmark Theater's Q&A podcast. In this podcast, you will hear a discussion with director Robert Kenner from the film Merchants of Doubt, moderated by Landmark Theater's Dan Gorski, recorded at the Landmark West LA.
They did want to just get us started with how you got from Food Inc. to this film. What drew you into this story?
I was on a shoot during Food Inc. Where I went to a hearing on whether to label cloned meat. I didn't realize there was such a thing as cloned meat. But then a person from the meat industry stood up and said, I really don't think it's in the interest of the consumer to let them know what they're eating. You know, it's just not at all something, it would be too confusing, it would be a burden for them. And I thought, who the hell is saying such a thing? And I went back and found there are groups like Citizens for Consumer Freedom, who are funded by the fast food industry, who are there to stop you from knowing what you're eating. And then I found like 100 other of these groups. Their names are the exact opposite of what they're pretending to be. It's a total Orwellian world. And that created some interest. And then I read Naomi and Eric's book, and then sort of pieces just kept falling together. And it was ultimately, how do you get people, the tobacco industry. I was friends with Stan, who you see in the film here. How, when you know that tobacco kills and is addictive, can you create doubt for 50 years? And then figuring out that there were a lot of the same people created the interest.
That actually is what struck me, was how some of the same players and the same playbooks were being used, and I'm glad that you cover that. And I'm wondering, it almost seemed like that alone was a red flag.
Yeah, but they're not saying, hey, I work for tobacco, or hey, I work for coal. They're going out and pretending to be independent agents, and that's why when Glenn Beck has Steve Malloy on and says, are you in bed with Big Oil, and if so, how good in bed are they? And Steve Malloy said, no, I'm just trying to do the right thing. And no, he's getting paid major bucks. I mean, really, I went out to Steve Malloy's house. It was hard, were we looking at a mansion or were we looking at a hotel was the question. So it's then, as Jamie Ian Swiss, the magician, says, it's creating this illusion. It's masking the reality. It's giving confidence that you're hearing something that's true when it's not true.
Actually, I really liked how you layered that in, and I'm assuming that came towards the end, was the whole magic trick
the idea
thing.
Of thinking, it's, what happened is we kept saying these people are like magicians. They're so good at what they do. We kept saying it enough that we got the clever idea of calling a magician.
Something that I also was pretty surprised at was like that gentleman, Mark Morano, who was talking about his strategy. How was it easy to get them to talk so openly about something that seems kind of nefarious?
There were many people who didn't talk to me. Many, actually, some called up out of curiosity. The guy Peter Sparber, the person who put, another ingenious act, who, said it's not slow-burning cigarettes that cause house fires, it's couches, and suggested that police start escorting couches across state lines because they're so lethal, and that he was able to convince lawmakers we needed laws to put these flame retardants in the couches that turned out to not prevent fires and turned out to cause cancer. And Peter Sparber hid from those reporters for years, but I called him, and to my shock, he called back, and I had said to Sparber, you're so good at what you do. You're amazing. As he said in that memo, if you can do tobacco, you can do anything. And then he responded by saying, oh, Robbie, I don't call people, but I'm such a fan of your films. I've seen 15 of them. And later on, the reporter said, boy, did he sucker you. But what was interesting was he said, I said, it's not just tobacco, it's not just flame retardants, it goes on to multiple issues, including climate. And he said, you could take James Hansen, and I could take a garbage man, and I could get America to believe that garbage man knows more about science than Hansen. And I said that on the air the other day on All Things Considered. And I just got a note tonight on the way over here from a cancer doctor in Oregon who said, it's so amazing because, I have patients who still smoke cigarettes and they think they're invincible. So in a way, these guys do convince people. If that garbage man has a good voice and he's convincing, we don't want this to be true, so he can help, mislead us. And these guys are great at misleading us. But Morano let me in. Morano, on some levels, was honest. Morano was absolutely entertaining. He was certainly as much fun to be with as anybody in the film. It's just when you match his words with his actions, it creates incredible damage. And so I juxtaposed it. At one point, one reviewer said he's a sociopath, and he wrote me and said, "What'd you say about me?" I said, "Mark, I didn't say a word about you. You said everything."
Well, I'm sure you were cynical when you started this, but I'm wondering if there was something that did surprise you in your investigation. Like, what was the biggest thing that kind of stood out?
Well, some of them you see, and it was, right now I'm starting to get attacked, which is, I guess, not a surprise because this is how they operate. It's not about science. It's not about anything other than taking the offensive and going at it. So it just keeps going on. But I also believe things can change, and I believe that we can, you look at the gay rights issue, that if there are three things that make up this situation: money, obviously, protecting industry, the ideological aspects of Fred Singer and Fred Seitz thinking that environmentalists are communists, and this tribal aspect that Michael Shermer talks about. But I think that tribe is a movable aspect, and that happened with gay rights, and I think it could happen with climate pretty quickly, and I hope it does happen pretty quickly because we're in need of it.
How come the environmentalists don't find a Mike Morano? How come they don't find people who could go, point of fact, whatever that, why don't they find spokesmen? Surely there are people who share their attitude who have as much skill as he does.
The advantage that Morano and these guys have is they don't care about facts. That it's total. There's a guy, Richard Berman, who was Citizens for Consumer Freedom, who went on to worked for the alcohol industry and attacked Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and then went on to attack the Humane Society when he was working for Factory Farms, and was just recorded in Colorado where he was talking to the energy industry, which is the next big payday. So in that sense, that's where so much climate denial comes from, because there's huge bucks there. And he went on to say, you can lose pretty or you can win ugly. Pay me the bucks and you will win. And I don't care about facts. I will go after people. He sort of did the ugly version of Mark Morano. He makes Morano look pretty. So these guys have no scruples. That helps them. And the other part is, that's the real thing. But I think, and I just did a whole bunch of panels with a lot of reporters from the New York Times, and I think in some ways it was the established media that helped create the problem by looking at this as if there were a debate when there is no debate. And the sort of tyranny of two sides, which is generally very good reporting, but in this case, it's not good reporting. Because it's like the earth is round, the earth is flat. We don't need two sides when things are established. The real debate is, what are we going to do about it? And you can have conservative ideas, you can have liberal ideas. I was just with Hansen and the New York Times guys, and Hansen was saying, he said, I think it's the liberals' fault because we should have a carbon neutral tax where the money gets back to people right away, and it shouldn't go to government so conservatives could accept it. And maybe it would happen quickly, because Hansen's really concerned where we're going, much more so than you saw in the film. But I think it's because these guys are willing to be out and out. Well, I'll have to watch what I say. In that I'm getting threats.
How do we move the other side to change?
People say, is this just preaching to the converted, this film? Well, first of all, there are a number of good Republicans who believe this issue is really important. Bob Inglis has been working tirelessly with numbers of Republicans. He feels that the vast majority of the Congress thinks this issue is true. They're just hoping that they can get some backing out there. But I also think it takes, it takes the congregation to become part of the choir and start becoming more active. And one of the things that I'm pushing, that my big takeaway is that we can't have newspapers representing scientists as skeptics when they're paid PR deniers. So there's a group called Forecast the Facts that's starting these petitions. They got Glenn Beck kicked off the air. They've gotten the Washington Post to start not accepting deniers as op-ed writers. The BBC is no longer putting on deniers on television. So I think it's the established press. I was annoyed at the two reporters that just broke that Willie Soon article, which is a scientist who's perhaps one of the more serious scientists who's a denier, one of the 4 or 5 of them, who it turns out is getting over $1 million, which we kind of knew about for a long time. So it's interesting it became the front page article in the New York Times. But what was new is that he was doing it, and he was calling his work deliverables for the oil company. So he was saying, I'll write a scientific paper, and this is a deliverable. Exposing that turns people.
Right. Well, I guess my question is a little bit more directed in the fact that it's easy to see that the bigger picture is to change our congressional representation, is to change how the more popular channels that we're getting our feed from. But how do we as a community change the people who are voting those people into office?
I think that we start by affecting how the information is passed along with the media. That's my first way of changing how voters vote. Because I think when people are confused, they're going to be confused by the garbage man that Peter Sparber talked about. So hopefully the media will start representing this in the way that it should, and we're getting a lot of feedback from this. But so specifically, Forecast the Facts or Take Part /doubt is another. These are places where they're starting these petitions, and we're seeing effect. And then there's the marches that 350.org did. But in terms of changing other voters, I think it's really changing the information they're getting. We're meeting with numbers of people in Congress who are starting to demand, senators who are demanding that these think tanks, if they're paying for scientific papers, they have to start releasing what they're paying. So that's in the works right now. So there are ways of trying to create transparency, which is what Food Inc. is about and what this film is about.
Okay, so he's talking about getting more of the message of the film online.
Well, the way the message gets out there, first of all, I'm not going to end up getting a penny from it, but the way the message gets out there is that if people go to see it, so tweet it out there, hopefully we'll get people in the theaters, then the media starts picking it up. The New York Times said we'll do a front page article about the film itself if people are seeing the film. So it's that's what happened with Food Inc. It starts to roll as people are seeing it. It becomes more and more of a conversation, and senators and people start picking it up. It will come out. It takes about a year for it to come out in the free media, though I'm sure people put it out there, and we're starting to put out other pieces that didn't make it in the film. One about a woman who started the Tea Party, one of 20 people who started the Tea Party. She's in Georgia, and she is outraged. It's against the law in Georgia to put solar panels on your property and sell back some of that electricity to your local town. So there are these dairy farmers going bankrupt who want to put solar panels, and the Kochs are coming in with what they call the Electric Freedom Act to stop you from having the right. They're in Florida. It's the Kochs and ALEC, ALEC is just insidious, and they're doing bad things. And one of the things we're doing is getting people like Google and my backers, eBay, to quit ALEC, and they have, so that that they should have no part of this organization. so it's those little actions, but hopefully the next few months are going to be in the theaters, and then it's going to keep rolling, but we're releasing independent videos that are all really interesting. So,
is there enough money in green energy to make the oil companies kind of wake up to the opportunity?
Yeah. Well, I have two different answers. One is, it reminds me of the old Jack Benny line where he was held up at gunpoint, and the robber said, "Your money or your life." And he said, "Give me a minute to think about that." These guys have a lot of money in the ground, and they're having a hard time walking away from it. They, like the tobacco companies, are very well aware of what the science is. So no surprise, and that's why you saw, Rex Tillerson making deals with Putin to go drill in the Arctic. There's a lot of money still in oil, but there are other things. It's a little like Bob Inglis said to me. It's like the Teamsters who, at the turn of the last century didn't want to give up the horse and buggy, and weren't, fighting the automobile at all costs. These guys, their sort of natural instinct is to stick with what they have. Coal companies are certainly sticking with it, and they're putting out, you'll lose jobs if we don't have coal, so that we can all live like those great towns in West Virginia, which always amazes me that argument can hold. But I don't know. There is money, but the other part of the answer that I think is interesting, as George Schultz said, there are other businesses that are going to get hurt really bad. One of the videos we're putting out is about reinsurance. We're talking, hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars of a business, and I interviewed the head of Swiss Re, and he was saying, we're going to be out of business if this continues. And they're working really hard. So there are a number of industries that are starting to go fight back. And this might have seemed anti-business. I think business can help lead to the solution. I guess I consider myself a bit of a liberal and think government can help too. But I do think business can be a huge factor in turning this around.
Right, so she's talking about sort of manipulating
polar
the heartstrings regarding these issues, and
first of all, I don't consider this a climate film. I consider it really a film about the playbook, the ultimate playbook. Industry at the moment happens to be energy, but I think, I don't know. I didn't go there, though. You'll notice one of the last images are kids playing on the beach. So it certainly is the biggest issue facing young people. And in the studies now, the surveys, they're finding out that young Republicans are much more inclined to want action on climate than older Republicans are.
You talk about cap and trade.
Hansen said cap and trade is a little like during the Middle Ages where you could buy your way out of hell. You could, pay. I really think the carbon tax is the ultimate answer, whether it's a revenue neutral one, which Schultz and Inglis and Hansen strongly advocate. I think that will create action across the board. There's too much corruption in the cap and trade, so that would be my strong advocacy.
Well, I'm sure that you're working on promoting this film, but do you have some ideas for what you're going to work on next? Have you thought about that yet?
I'm in the middle of a film. Eric Schlosser, who wrote Fast Food Nation, wrote a book called Command and Control, and it's about someone in a nuclear missile silo who drops a socket and almost sets off a warhead that's stronger than all the weapons in World War II, including Hiroshima and Nagasaki times 3. It's a 6 hours of finding out if the East Coast blows up, but turned out to be the second worst accident that week.
All right, well, we look forward to more from you, and
It's a
thank you.
comedy.
Thank you so much for coming today.
Thanks a lot, Dan.